Very good. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're super excited to be talking to you about living health technology assessment. The formal title has in it the three P's associated with it: policy, practice, and philosophy. And I'm sure we've got things well covered with our panelists here. So I'm David Thompson from Rubidoux Research. I'm an independent consultant in the HEOR, HTA space, and I'm joined by three outstanding researchers that two of them I've worked with over the past few years, and one of them I'm just getting acquainted with. So I'm looking forward to what each of them has to say. So the backdrop of this is related to health technology assessment, and specifically the systematic literature review portion of that. And over the years, we've always lamented that the work products that we do in whether it's in HEOR or RWE or health technology assessment, we've lamented the fact that they get done. There's a lot of work, energy, and resources put into getting them done. And then they get put on a shelf where their shelf life is rather short because they quickly become outdated as new resources, new materials, new data come on the scene. And the solution to that is to prevent them from being a one-off type of activity and turn them into something that is continuously updated. And that's what we mean when we talk about a living type of document, one that is continuously updated, whether that's an SLR, whether that's a full HTA submission, whether that's an economic model or what have you. And the idea here is that in the current age in which artificial intelligence and specifically large language models have come to the fore, there are opportunities for automating the most tedious and time consuming and labor intensive aspects of the work that we do. And our focus today, again, is on systematic literature reviews. And so there's opportunities and challenges. There also are risks associated with automation based on AI, and we'll get into that a little bit. But that's the backdrop, and I wanted to now take the time to introduce our three speakers. First is Melanie Golub, who is a researcher at the University of Oxford. She specializes in evidence-based healthcare, focusing on advancing methodologies for living systematic literature reviews. She's published widely on living review methods and also has performed a Delphi survey of experts in the field. So we're looking forward to what Melanie has to say. Next is Evelyn Rizzo, who is the founder of Mobility HEOR. She leverages over 15 years of research experience in the market access and reimbursement pathways to help translate clinical data into compelling value stories for emerging medical technologies. And she's also actually been maintaining multiple living reviews since even before anyone on this call has heard of GPT. And then finally, we have Kevin Kalmus, who is the founder of Nested Knowledge, which is the industry-leading platform for AI-enabled systematic literature reviews. Interestingly, his background is not only in science and bioethics, but his master's thesis was a proposed approach to living data in medical publishing. And of course, anyone who knows Kevin knows just how infectious is his personality and the passion that he brings to all this. And I always say that he might need to dial back the caffeine a little bit. But hopefully he hasn't for this. We're going to have a lot of fun. There he goes. All right. So we're about to start sharing some slides and having the presenters get into it. And I believe we are beginning with Melanie.
Yeah, and it looks like I have the ability to share now, so I will go ahead and do that. Let me just get this up. Okay, there we go. Hopefully everyone can see my slides.
You're set.
Okay, great. Well, let me go ahead and get started. So thanks for the introduction. Appreciate it, David. So I'm Melanie Golub. I do research in living evidence synthesis, and yes, I'm studying at Oxford. So we'll get a little bit more into that momentarily. I can advance my slides. There we go. And so my disclosures are that, yes, I'm doing a DPhil. I also work full-time in the HTA space, but I'm getting a PhD part-time as well. So I do have experience both in the health technology as well as kind of living evidence synthesis more broadly. But I do want to point out that the things I talk about today, the views expressed are my own and not those of my employer, and I don't have any current financial conflicts. Okay, so let's get into this a bit. So we talked a bit about systematic reviews and especially living ones and how they've been around for a little bit now. As you can see, based on this graph showing systematic reviews over the past about 20 years, the growth in the publication of them has grown almost exponentially. So it really started to take off. And Cochrane, hopefully most people have heard of Cochrane, they're kind of the gold standard in systematic reviews and evidence synthesis. So in 2017, they created a living pilot program for living systematic reviews and created standards. So that's kind of what led to this idea of, hey, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of literature being published. How do we keep up with it? So
am I living? Oh, what a funny thing to say.
This song that I hear always reminds me of just this whole problem around living, because does it mean the same thing to everyone? And that's part of what I researched. So David already went over this definition, but living systematic reviews are ones that incorporate new evidence as it becomes published. So the idea is they're continually up to date, which if you're doing something at the point of care or you're creating guidelines or policy, that's very important. So what I'm going to show you today is two of the main studies that I've been working on, which the first one is an overview of living systematic reviews. And then the next one looks at the broader umbrella of living evidence synthesis. But for this first one, I'll focus on living systematic reviews. So these are the Cochrane standards. So again, they were published 2017, updated in 2019. They identified both a reason for doing living systematic reviews and then a plan for how to do it. So the reasons were that the topic was a priority for decision making, that there was a high likelihood of evidence emerging on the topic, that there was a high amount of uncertainty in the topic as well. So that was reason why you should do a living systematic review, but then how you would do it. So a predefined search frequency, a predefined update threshold, that continual evidence surveillance, and then criteria for when you would update your methods, and then when you would stop. So, you probably wouldn't want to keep doing this indefinitely because you don't have those reasons anymore. So maybe it's not a priority anymore, or the evidence is not really coming out, or there's less uncertainty. But my question was, are these standards being followed? And do they matter? So my first study that I did was an overview of living systematic reviews, using those Cochrane standards as a guide to identify whether or not studies, the published systematic reviews, were actually living, with the idea of informing future best practices in this space. So I looked at living systematic reviews within the health space and compared them to those living standards that Cochrane outlined. And because it was Cochrane that created this guidance, these different standards, I wanted to compare Cochrane to non-Cochrane reviews to see if people outside of Cochrane were using these same standards to consider their systematic reviews living. So the methods is a Prisma diagram. As you can see, there were quite a few records. I did this search in 2022. And at the time, there were 677 records identified as living. And so what was interesting about that, and you can kind of see it over on the right-hand side there, is that there were a lot that were protocols or preprints. So kind of that, hopefully people remember the COVID pandemic, and there were a lot of living systematic review protocols published during that time, identifying the term living, because that almost became a buzzword in this space. But as you can see, based on the actual publications that came out of it, not a lot of those protocols actually turned into published living systematic reviews. And so among those originally identified living systematic reviews, there were 23 Cochrane living systematic reviews. And because I wanted to compare an equal number of randomly selected non-Cochrane reviews, then I selected 23 from among the 113 non-Cochrane reviews that were found. So jumping right into the results, this is just one of the many results that will hopefully be in the published paper that will be coming out. But most of the living systematic reviews did not meet those living standards identified by Cochrane. And surprising or not, that includes Cochrane living systematic reviews as well. So I separately identified those that adhered to all the criteria for living. So those reasons for living that were identified. And these were ones that were objectively stated in the published review. And then those that adhered to the living guidance. And as you can see, it was not a large percentage. If you look over at the right-hand side of the screen, comparing Cochrane to non-Cochrane, you'll see that overall Cochrane reviews did adhere to a larger proportion of those living standards, but still not across the board. And you can see these standards were essentially not followed at all outside of Cochrane. So I did do, again, this is data originally from 2022. This changed slightly. I did a limited update just to see if things had changed in the last 4 years. And so looking at studies over the past year, and it's improved slightly, but only for Cochrane. So Cochrane is adhering to their own standards more, but still not across the board and still not in non-Cochrane reviews. So that being said, it really shows that just using the term living isn't enough. And, I think I was hinting at that when I talked about the protocols and preprints. Just saying something is living doesn't actually make it living. So, adhering to a certain set of standards is important, because if you think something's living and it's not, it can waste time and resources. If you're relying on that living systematic review to do a guideline for the point of care or a policy for reimbursement, that can really affect your conclusions that you draw or what you say if it's not actually up to date. So this idea that it's not consistent and getting at more usable standards is important. So that was the next part of the research that I did, which was a Delphi consensus process. And the important thing about a Delphi consensus process is gathering experts, experts in the field, and it's usually on complex topics, but it's an iterative, structured way of achieving consensus. So at the top, you can see that it was informed by a published living critical interpretive synthesis. And then I also did a survey among authors in the field, so doing living systematic reviews and living evidence synthesis more generally. And I also hosted a workshop at a conference, at a large conference. And then it was also informed by that overview of living systematic reviews. So there were 3 rounds, 23 draft statements. I had 29 panelists. As you can see, the response rate and agreement rate were high for that many experts from across the world in living evidence synthesis. So the results of that Delphi consensus process were that among the 23 statements originally, 19 of them achieved consensus. But what was interesting is that there was more agreement only in certain areas. So things like transparency and version history, more sort of subjective measures. But then there was not as much agreement on the more objective measures, like should automation be used, digital tools, things like that, which I thought was interesting, considering those are the things that would help you do a living evidence synthesis more on a regular basis and update it, which is the important key factor in a living evidence synthesis. So overall, from those 2 studies, from looking at living systematic reviews and living evidence synthesis more generally and getting experts to kind of agree, transparency is the most important thing. Just saying what you're going to do and being clear about it. And you know, I guess being honest. So like, how current is the evidence? What is that frequency of search? And did you adhere to it? Or did you not? Sometimes it changes because of a variety of reasons. But also, what triggers an update? When will living mode stop? And I think this is one of those important things that a lot of people said, oh, we'll stop when there's more certainty in the evidence. But in doing this research, I found that a lot of people stopped because they ran out of funding. But they didn't say that, and you didn't know that it had stopped. It would just say, we're going to update once a month, and then you can't find any more. And you're like, okay, what happened? Where did it go? So all that to say, following back to that earlier point, do the standards matter? Are they being followed? Standards do matter. Because if we want living to mean the same thing to everyone, then they need to be followed. So with that, I will end and say thank you to Nested Knowledge for having me on this. And if you want more information about that overview of living systematic reviews or the work that went into the survey workshop in Delphi, I put a couple QR codes on there. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free. And I don't know if we're taking questions now or later, but thanks everyone for your time and appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thanks, Melanie. I couldn't help but recognize that once you started updating your review of living systematic reviews, you were doing a living review of living reviews.
That's so, a good point.
It's all getting so meta on us, isn't it?
It is.
But thanks very much. And yeah, we're going to have questions at the end. And I should say as well, those of you listening in, hopefully you can see at the top of your screen a little question mark button. And if you have questions that you would like to type in over the course of the presentations, feel free to do so. And as moderator, I will sift through them and help interject them as we go along. But without further ado, I will ask Evelyn to pull up her slides and go ahead and you have the stage.
Thanks, Dave. Can everybody see my slides? I'm going to take the silence as a yes because I can't see you anymore. Okay, great. Okay, my name is Evelyn Rizzo. I have been doing living reviews for about 5 years now, I believe. We started using the Nested Knowledge platform when I worked for a medical communications agency. One of our clients was a large pharmaceutical company that just needed help better organizing their evidence. So we had initially engaged Nested Knowledge as a systematic literature review platform, but then kind of developed that to really meet the needs of the clients. So I'm a longtime user, a super user, some would say, and I have been in this space for quite some time. So I'm going to try to advance my slides.
I think you might have to click on your slide.
Okay.
There. Try again. There you go.
Okay, great. So, why living libraries matter in HUR? Well, there is continuously more and more evidence coming through on many different therapeutic areas. So updating these reviews allow businesses, companies, med devices to show where their products sit in comparison with their comparators, how their outcomes are faring, monitor for adverse events within their space. These traditional reviews that have previously been done quickly become outdated as the new trial data emerges. So with these platforms, we're able to pull in clinicaltrials.gov, new real world evidence studies, new literature being published on a regular basis so that we can stay current on what evidence is happening, see what economic evidence is being developed to really support future research in these therapeutic areas and where resource allocation is happening within these pharmaceutical companies. These teams need practical ways to track these evidence, the evidence that's coming out, and it really helps with better payer communications that may need to be done on an annual basis. So living evidence libraries turn one-time reviews into reusable organizational infrastructure. And just to share a client example, you know, these teams may be segmented by therapeutic area, but work on similar molecules. So instead of each team starting a systematic literature review at the baseline, at search number 1, they can go into these evidence libraries and start with all the last 10 years of evidence using the Nested Knowledge platform, for example. We set up all the evidence, tag it by molecule, and then anyone from any team in any therapeutic area in a company can go to that nest and see what evidence has been published that fit the company criteria at any time. So nobody's starting from zero. So this can save, it could save hundreds of hours, honestly, depending on how big the publication body is for that particular therapeutic area. So the evidence is accelerating, standards are increasing, and we all need to balance scale against costs. That comes back again to the time it takes to start a literature review from zero. So, you know, if you've been paying attention, you've seen that there were lots of cuts in pharma in the last year or so. There's not as many people there doing it, you know, doing the work they used to. So there needs to be efficiencies put into place so that the evidence can still be monitored, can still be developed, and technology assessment submissions still need to be done. So these types of platforms really help increase efficiencies for those teams when it comes to monitoring the research, preparing economic models, doing indirect treatment comparisons. So there's rising evidence pressure, and there's also in some cases, less people to do the research. So we need tools like these literature review platforms that help automate these processes. So the living libraries that we have set up, we automate the search. So in these particular instances, a quarterly search for high publication evidence areas is sufficient. So we monitor on a monthly or a quarterly basis the evidence that is being published. And then we screen them. We always use the AI supported dual review. And because these projects have been going on for over 4 years now, like Melanie said, when will we stop? Well, in the case of the living libraries, I'm going to say this is different than the living review, because we are constantly monitoring the molecules. At this point, we don't intend to, there's not a stop date, but we continually screen these articles on the quarterly basis. And it learns from the decisions over the last 4 years. So we have always human in the loop. That's my stance to any AI tools that I use here and elsewhere in the work and in scientific practice. We use the AI dual reviewer. So if I'm reviewing, then the AI model is also making a decision. So, and then at the end, there'll be a actual human researcher to do any adjudication. So there does need to be 2 humans, but the AI does the review for all the abstracts along with a live reviewer. And then with the tagging, there's also recommendation settings and applying settings. But again, my preference and is for the human in the loop. So I always recommend the tags. These tags are based on client needs and outcomes that they are interested in. So that structure has already been in place for the years that we've been monitoring these libraries, and that the extraction, the AI supports where that evidence is in the literature and will show the reviewer as they're doing the tagging. So it's not automatic. It does show us, and then we can tag it. And then with the meta-analytics, there are also full features within the software to automate it. But it also has features to help speed up the process and keep the human in the loop. So the AI is optional, but a platform is indispensable because there's lots of efficiencies that it can bring into the work process. This is an example of something we presented last year at ISPOR. Tokenization is a hot topic at these within HUR at ISPOR, lots of vendors. So we wanted to monitor who's doing data linkage, why they're doing it, and for what disease states. So this is a project that can continue to be updated as we check the literature to see what circumstances, what success they're having with linking the populations and what methods they're using to do the data linkage. We presented this at AMCP and a different version. This was the United States, and then we did a different version for ISPOR. So just to drill down on the case study. So, our particular client at the time was covering 8 different disease areas. So they were looking to apply reusable methods. Like they had a set population, a set geographical location, set interventions, and they wanted to monitor this particular molecule for HEOR decision making and to support reimbursement discussions with CMS. So these reviews have been updated quarterly since 2022. Back to that key year that living reviews started really popping up in the literature. So based on our constant monitoring of the evidence, we've already screened over 16,000 articles with AI as the dual screener. We've extracted evidence from over 1,300 articles across these therapeutic areas. The updates for each NEST are usually the time spent on a quarterly basis is about 10 hours. And then the recall rate for the screening is 91%. So the client has continually praised this as a top efficiency. And here's the quote: "The Living Library Project was the top accomplishment of the health economics department this year." So they were very happy at the efficiencies that something like this design using this type of platform could provide their team. So for HEOR, it really helps because you can have one lead that takes control of these quarterly updates. So you can create these evidence cycle and update it. These scheduled searches help the teams catch new evidence early. You can reuse these nests across the team structure, across the company structure. So even the full meta-analysis can be maintained with lean resourcing. So that concludes my case example here. And I'll answer questions at the end.
Very good. Thanks, Evelyn. And while Kevin is putting up his slides, yeah, this is really interesting stuff. And the fact that you've been doing this so long is impressive because you were doing it, kind of before everyone was talking about it, right? So, so you're right on the forefront of things. Okay, so we'll go to Kevin. Yeah, now we're seeing your screen, and following that, we'll go to a Q&A session.
Excellent. Got to make sure I unmute myself too. Thank you both, Melanie and Evelyn, for your presentations. I actually wanted to zoom out on this. I know that anyone who's worked with me probably knows me as the AI platforms person, but today I don't want to focus on AI or even on nested knowledge. I want to focus on living systematic review as a practice. As Dave said, even before I founded Nested Knowledge, my master's thesis was focused in on how can we really address some of these core, let's just say core inconsistencies or even just blockers in management of published data as it comes through. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. I should say, I think my conflicts slide, there we go. My conflicts are quite obvious. I'm the CEO and an equity holder in Nested Knowledge. And on our website, the first words after Nested Knowledge it's living systematic review. We really try to be a platform to support updatability in any review. That's not to say that using our platform forces you to make every review living, just that it's an effort that we encourage and that we try to support from the platform level. But just to jump in on our topics for today, I just want to talk about why people are moving toward living systematic reviews, the challenges that are reported in the literature, recommendations that I've seen come across from expert research, implementation, and guidance, and then some key takeaways on what makes living systematic reviews possible and what might block them. Okay, starting with why move to living evidence. And for this, I do want to focus on the difference between effectively one-shot reviews, which is the standard, and the approach of living systematic review. Excuse me. I found this quote from 2014 in, I think, what is one of the seminal publications about living systematic review. Is proposed by Elliott et al. That living systematic reviews could be the future of evidence synthesis, long before GPT was on any of our minds. This quote really stood out to me. The average systematic review is out of date at the time of publication. And I think we all know what that's like. You do nine revisions of your review. You then send it in. The editors get back to you, and maybe 9 months later, your systematic reviews in the literature, and now you are already thinking about how you might need to update it. So the number one problem that living systematic reviews set out to solve is actually bringing current evidence to bear. So literature is emerging more swiftly than ever, and whether it's about new therapies or it's new evidence on older therapies, all these decisions around health policy, around reimbursement, around clinical practice, right, around the guidelines for how patients should be treated, all of those do depend in the end on the literature. And if we're out of date, we are out of sync with best practices. I should note, though, that living systematic reviews are not just to keep things up to date. I also think that there's a problem in systematic review generally of inconsistent methods, of inconsistent practices for each of those core stages of a systematic review. I think we all do our best to follow best practices, but I think Melanie showed there are tens of thousands of systematic reviews published every year, and there's very little chance that those are actually following all the same methods. So the most cited benefit in my research was not actually keeping evidence up to date. It was actually standardizing and improving quality of the actual reviews themselves. So moving from a one-shot approach to a living approach, I think that means you can also be very thoughtful from the beginning about how you're actually going to practice that single review rather than dozens of one-shots. Transparency and replicability. I don't think that this is necessarily going to happen just because you make a review living, but a lot of the discussions in Melanie's Delphi survey cover things like how can you pre-specify your methods such that you're being transparent about what your living systematic review will do in the case that future evidence emerges. So I think that living systematic reviews are an opportunity to enhance replicability, but also transparency of methods and of the evidence that you're bringing to bear. And then I know that we are kind of covering two areas here. One is sort of the more publication-focused living reviews, but the other one, and Dave and Evelyn and I all work in HEOR. So I think that thinking about living HTA, I've seen tons of publications come through just in the past 3 years about the future of HTA, and all of those same questions that come up in the publication realm come up in the HTA realm, except potentially they might come up more commonly. As Evelyn noted, there's sometimes the need to update these on a yearly basis, no matter what, across all drugs, across all therapeutic areas. Okay, so why haven't we moved to living review? Or for those who haven't moved to a living paradigm, why have they not done so? The first issue that's been brought up, and I'm not going to drill down on this too much because it's quite obvious, maintaining a living review is a lot of work. Building a systematic review is a lot of work, and it's more work intensive if you have to update it, whether that's going to be on a regular cadence or whether you're going to build in certain triggers. It's very difficult to perform even one review, and doing it on an ongoing basis adds work to everyone's very busy schedules. I heard Melanie also say this in terms of funding. So it's not just labor effort, but it's also funding to support that labor effort. In the guidances that I've seen, the number one proposed solution here is automation or augmentation. But I'm going to quote Evelyn's slides and say that AI to me is optional, but as long as you are bringing things into a platform, it does make that labor effort easier. And it also makes it easier to maintain the responsibility and ownership of the project. I will also make one call here, and this is in the guidances. I think that automation is secondary and harmonization of workflows is primary. What do I mean by this? I think that LSRs present an opportunity to make any review that you undertake follow practices that would match both best practices as published, but also consistency internally with your teams. So I did put this on a challenges slide, and the challenge that I'm referring to is the challenge of actually harmonizing practices across teams, across either within your team across members, but also between teams. Harmonizing all of that is going to be a major challenge all the way into the future of evidence synthesis. And without consistent methodologies, I don't think we can say that we've found consistent results. So I think that the lack of harmonization in the current systematic review literature is a major challenge that cannot be solved by just one person. And then the last one, and I found another really good quote on this from an author from Cochrane that was surveyed on Living Systematic Review. They called Living Review, quote, a job that never ends. And so I guess I'll just give a shout out to Melanie, to Evelyn, to anyone who's maintaining Living Systematic Reviews. It's sort of like you are the watcher on the wall. You're the one who actually is taking responsibility for this. And a lot of the guidance actually was talking about, what if you're owner of a project, the person who's really doing the work, what if they leave? What do we do? So it really comes down to people in the end. There needs to be a responsible individual or individuals that undertake to actually make those updates, or in the case that you cannot do so, hand off the responsibility. And I think that Melanie also noted that maybe it's a job that never ends, but maybe some Living Systematic Reviews should have sort of a senescence date or like a sunsetting, just to avoid all of us doing the same living review until we retire. I did a very quick AI rapid review in our platform to look for publishable living reviews. I will share that project after the webinar. We found over 240 protocols for living systematic reviews, over 100 first publications, and then also a fair number of updates. I should note that we actually renamed this project the Living Systematic Review Graveyard because there were barely more updates than there were first publications. And in a lot of cases, and you can see it on my slide below, a lot of these were created around April of 2020 as living reviews on COVID as it emerged. And many of these living COVID projects were very important for those, first couple of months addressing new therapies or emerging epidemiological problems during the pandemic. And then many of them are now, I'd say, in the graveyard of living reviews. So how can we avoid the Living Systematic Review graveyard? I think that one important way is talk about your triggers in advance. And this was not very well specified across all protocols. Just if you zoom in on only the protocols and first publications, almost half of them had no specified update schedule. So they said we're living, but they did not say, hey, we're living on a certain cadence. And they also did not say, here's the trigger that would lead to another publication. A lot of them proposed monthly updates to the living reviews. I can only assume that they mean an internal update because I did not see any published review that was being updated on a monthly basis. Across all the protocols and those first publications, I should note that the main topic here was drug safety and efficacy, especially of COVID vaccines and COVID therapies. Many of these were living meta-analyses, which of course take that extra effort. You might need to involve a statistician and someone who's updating your project. I think that's very ambitious, but I think it's absolutely worth doing. I think that the harmonization and the responsibility and the automation pieces that we've talked about on earlier slides really come into play here. But overall, I should say that across epidemiology, across drug safety, across the use of devices, across diagnostics, all of these are topics that should be undertaken. And then it really becomes a question of why are you maintaining your living review? You can see some of the rationales given here. Across 544 total publications in all of these areas, many of them gave multiple rationales, and almost all of them agreed. It's clinical practices or guidelines, it is currency, and there is uncertain evidence or questions that remain to be resolved. So those are, to me, that aligns with everything that's been presented today, but I do think that means that we should all be thoughtful about when should we actually undertake to make something living rather than just answering a one-shot question. And I was interested, how many of these people are actually reporting the use of AI? Only 76 out of those 544 publications even mentioned the use of automation or AI. So living review is still very much a human practice. Okay, what recommendations were in the literature on LSRs? I just keep harping on it. I guess I'll not repeat myself, but I'll say that acceleration is one thing, but standardization is even more important. And I think that we can even drill down on that a little bit. Standardizing methods, so following the same search screen, extract, synthesize, give insights, all of those in a process that can be both transparent and replicable, but also harmonizing reporting so there can be interoperability between different reviews, or at least different answers on the same question. Some warnings from the pandemic practices. There was actually a publication in the wake of the pandemic, which effectively said that all of these living practices and so many different living reviews and so many different venues actually might have hindered the translation of evidence into clinical practice. And what we might want to think more about is reduce duplicative efforts rather than just going out there and saying we need living evidence and ignoring what is there. I think this means cross-organizational collaboration and communication might be the only way, because I think that all these researchers were very well intended, but probably a combined effort would have done a lot more than 100 living reviews on the same question. Then we all know the problem in systematic review is always garbage in. And if you add in preprints, there is a ton of evidence to be basically culled when you're doing these reviews. So the problem of I think it's a base problem of systematic review in general, that you're going to be flooded with potential evidence of interest. I think that really does mean that we need to take on what they called in this publication the infodemic that can result from rapid publication, but also turning around and doing rapid duplicative living review. So my takeaway here is good intentions are not enough, and more evidence is not better evidence. I found a really good 2023 guidance summary. So this was we keep talking about meta systematic reviews, but this is a review of living systematic review guidances. They called out that you should narrow these in on high priority topics where you do have this uncertainty about the actual answers. And when updating, it's very important to be transparent. You can see that they laid out some guidances on how to schedule searches, have decision rules built in, have clear version control and changes. Make sure that your eligibility criteria are not shifting over time. If you're shifting people, make sure that the new reviewer is practicing screening the same way as the earlier reviewer. All of these are more, let's just say these are guidances that are for you in the trenches who are actually doing these living reviews. I think that turning to Ianizzi et al. Is a good source, but I also look to other guidances that have emerged. My team actually performed a similar review in Living Systematic Review for HTA purposes and found a lot of similar recommendations. They called out a lot of the same benefits that we've discussed today: timely identification, trying to enhance sort of on-the-ball decision-making processes. And they had very, very similar guidances on transparency, on harmonizing workflows, on establishing a maintenance period or an update period. And then they also called out explicitly that getting multi-stakeholder input on the design and on the triggers for updates was important in the HTA context as well. So I think that even if publication and HTA are slightly different use cases for living evidence, I do think the guidances actually are very similar. What are the calls for the future? So those are the guidances for the present, the calls for the future. Basically, operational hurdles remain, ethical hurdles remain, and I think that it really is around transparency and completeness and avoiding waste. But I think that Living Systematic Review is this great opportunity. I think that the way to move forward in this area is to make sure that we are narrowing our focus on the areas that should actually be living. So new technological areas, uncertain questions, healthcare areas where interim analyses may change the decision, or where there's known to be emerging evidence, where scientific understanding is shifting constantly. You can probably hear a lot of the themes here. Living Systematic Review is most important to practice when the questions have uncertain answers, or we know that the answers might change as evidence emerges. I do want to get to questions, so I'm just going to give you, a lightning round of takeaways here. So what is the current state of systematic review, and how can Living Systematic Review help? But also, what are the challenges? Labor-intensive work is quoted as a major challenge, but I want to highlight today that human responsibility and ownership are the foundation for all systematic reviews, but especially for living systematic reviews. And really, personal responsibility is the only way to avoid the living systematic review graveyard. Standardizing methods and reporting is extremely important, and that includes things like decision rules on when to update the evidence in public. Methodological transparency is a major need to ensure that we are not just layering more information onto the infodemic. And I will put in a last support for platform approaches. I I will leave it to you whether automation is appropriate for a living review, but I do think that platforms can help with all of the rest of those things you see here. So responsibility, standard practices, decision rules, all of those can be built into a platform and make your life easier along the way. But thank you so much. And I will turn it to Dave for some sum up and then to the audience for questions.
Yeah, very good. And if you could stop sharing your screen, everyone will be able to see us all. There we go. We do have some questions that have come in, and I'd like to encourage the audience to continue to draft them. I actually have one question that is very timely, and I think perhaps each of you might want to respond to it. Just last week in The Lancet was published an analysis of quote unquote fabricated references in the scientific literature. And the numbers were rather dramatic. In 2023, probably right before, sort of Chat GPT really began to take hold, they found that there was at least one fabricated reference in 1 out of every 2,828 papers. By 2025, that number had jumped to 1 in every 458. And in the first 6 weeks of this year, that number now stands as 1 in every 277 papers. Moreover, the issue sort of propagates itself, right? One fabricated reference all of a sudden is in the literature, and it gets pulled in by an AI robot to be analyzed in the next round. So, the backdrop of all of this is AI, and everyone knows that the key Achilles heel of AI is the hallucination, and the reference fabrication is the sort of the specific example of that when applied to the literature and systematic literature reviews. So I wanted to get all of your takes on this particular problem. It strikes me as the opportunities and the perils of using AI in SLRs. And, what do we do about this? Any one of you can go first.
Well,
Evelyn,
Dave,
please.
sure. Dave, I see it all the time. I do work with MedTech, and they will provide me their deck and their evidence. And, that's always the weak point, are the references. So, any big numbers, I'm always double checking. I'm always saying, this is not good. Any due diligence on this work or this product is going to flag any hyperbole, and these references are garbage. So it's just speaking back to the reviews. At least if with a platform, you have the ability to go back and check how this information got pulled in, from what source. As I said, I use Nested Knowledge Platform all the time. So, you can have annotations required for any tagging, so that you can say, this right here in this paragraph number 10 is where I got this information. So you have that traceability and can really help clean up your work.
So it's the traceability issue, because I've even seen examples of this myself, and the hallucinations, I must say, are very clever. So they will piece together authors who have done similar work but never jointly published together, and then they'll put them together, and then they'll put together a very plausible article title and reference citation, the whole 9 yards. So it can easily slip through the cracks, I would think. So what do you have to say about it, Kevin?
Thanks, Evelyn. And yes, everyone who works with us probably knows we're obsessed with traceability, partially for this reason, partially just so that, you want to make sure that the evidence that you're saying in public traces back to good evidence, not just evidence that actually exists. But I think this is going to be very difficult to address, because, as you say, this sort of propagates, right? There's a lot of stories about, back in the days of the opiate epidemic, people traced that there was like this claim that OxyContin was not addictive, and you trace it back, and it was like a 1980 editorial that said that. And so I think that evidence is going to be built on, or like we're on shifting sands really, and if your foundation is on shifting sands, you're going to be in trouble. I think that this might be a fight fire with fire situation where better synthesis, where you are scrutinizing the underlying references, can be a part of this, and review can be a filter, right? Like I think about screening all the time. You're constantly screening references in a systematic review. That's the number one activity. So I think that the evidence synthesis community can help with the fabricated reference problem, because you are going to be going in and scrutinizing the references that are going into your review. That does mean things like bibliomining, citation chasing. I hear so many different words for this, but like snowballing, all of these practices can help you find those initial references. And if you find something that doesn't seem to exist, then you have found that fabricated reference. There might need to be some guidance here. Again, I call for guidance a lot. I don't want to give it because I'm too busy building platforms, but I think that guidance on, if I'm an evidence synthesist and I encounter a fabricated reference, is it my responsibility to flag that sort of thing? So I do think that the synthesis community, let's say, actually has a role in addressing this.
Yeah. And in terms of guidelines, there's a question from the audience, and Melanie, maybe this is one that you'd like to field. Someone wrote in, I find pre-specifying several aspects of living systematic reviews, for example, the frequency of updates, hard. Do you have any advice on that? And obviously, it speaks to some of the things that have been covered on this this webinar already, the absence of sort of accepted standards for all of this.
Yeah, and happy to speak to that. But I think, you know, the questioner asked about pre-specifying, and I think you do want to go in with a plan so that people know what to expect, but also fully recognizing that plans can change. Right. So again, as long as you're transparent about what you do and if that is changed, so you might go in thinking, I'm going to look at it every month, but then realize that's not really feasible. Or I know Cochrane does a pretty good job of this. They'll say that they'll update they'll do a search every month, but they'll only publish an update if the conclusions have changed, or if something has actually changed, because otherwise, you know, what's the point of going through that whole publication process if nothing has meaningfully changed? So again, it gets back to that idea of just transparency. You know, do set a plan, because you should, if you're familiar at all with the evidence, you should have an idea how often the evidence is being published. But there's also this idea of being responsive. So this is where technology comes in. So you can set alerts for when new evidence comes out. And if something that comes out, like a landmark study, you could update right away and not wait for the month or whatever the cadence is that you pre-specified. So that's the other option. If it's not a time-based one, which probably is not actually preferable if you're using technology, it's more of a responsive update based on the actual publication of the evidence.
We're coming up on the top of the hour, but there's a few other questions that have come in. So I'm just going to throw them out to our panelists, and if the system shuts us down, then so be it. But here's another interesting one. What ethical concerns arise from increasing reliance on commercial AI platforms in evidence synthesis? Are we at risk of outsourcing critical scientific judgment to commercial AI systems?
No, because just like you said, you know, there are all these hallucinations. As long as this reveals itself as a problem, we will always need researchers and people, humans in the loop here, to make sure it's still good science.
I'll say we are at risk, but Evelyn's still right. So the risk is there, but if you have humans in the loop, like, again, as literally this is against my interest to say, as an AI platform provider, I think that in the end, it's down to the researcher. I think there should be, you know, multi-platform approaches, whatever you think is best for your own review, but in the end, research is for researchers.
All right, well, very good. And I think we do have to shut it down at this point in time. It's been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it, and I hope our audience has as well. And you can always follow up with each of these three individuals who are literally luminaries in the field of living systematic reviews. So I will just thank everyone for attending at this point in time, and look forward to seeing you out there, whether that's at the upcoming ISPOR conference or other venues in the near future. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you all.